We live in a simulation is a claim that is oftentimes heard nowadays. By simulation would be meant something akin to a computer game, something computational, and purportedly some thinkers allege that there is a high probability that we are living in some such simulation. Let's try to decisively debunk that claim, hopefully to where there is no doubt in our minds that it is bogus. Perhaps not even wrong, but simply a misuse of language, an illicit combining of words. So the first thing to address would be maybe the little word that's snuck in, which is we. We live in a simulation. What does that mean, we live in a simulation? If somebody is in a simulation, it would be me that is in a simulation. And to some extent, should we say, that is very easy, practically speaking, nowadays to do. If I put on a pair of goggles of a certain kind, I can be in a virtual, as it's called, reality. I can have appearances mediated to me by way of a screen that otherwise I would not see. In fact, if I simply go to a movie theater, I can at least experience two-dimensional sights, right? At least so far as they're on a screen, such that otherwise I may need to go to many different places to experience. Right? A high-speed car chase down a highway, how would I experience that from a bird's eye view unless I myself was in a helicopter and then all of a sudden it's in the mountains showing a scene and so forth. So that's also a type of quote-unquote virtual reality. Any time that appearances such as could be seen in real life are displayed by way of a screen, that could be called a simulation of sorts. Right? At any given instance, a display crystallizes what comes across to us as an image, and everything else, all the other scenes before and after, are stored as data, right, as information. And that information, again, needs to be converted, and it needs to direct what is displayed on a given screen. But what could it mean to be in a simulation beyond that? Here, see that what is being simulated are appearances, what is seen, namely, or heard. For example, I put on those VR goggles and I see myself on top of a mountain. And when I take that off, I would not see that. So appearances in that sense can certainly be simulated. And again, simply by playing a video, it can simulate appearances that otherwise would not be had. But what can simulation mean beyond that? Presumably, it would have to then involve the simulation of a self. And what is a self? I can construe myself as appearance, as that which is seen in a mirror, and that can be simulated. I can simply take a video of myself, and that's a simulation of myself qua external appearance. But what would it mean to simulate myself as sentience? Before we say, oh, that's easy. You just need to make some computations concerning brain activity, and you'll have sentience. You'll have yourself. Those statements rest on numerous simplistic, non-philosophical suppositions concerning the relation of subjects and objects, the nature of extension, what are called material things, and such. Right? They are certainly not sure and simple and common sense statements. And what is much more rooted in critical thought is the claim that sentience itself cannot be simulated. Sentience is not an appearance. It is that which sustains, we could say, appearances. And therefore, there's no way to put the cart before the horse and compute anything so as to have the sentience itself, such as all appearances, including those that concern computers and computation and such, are predicated on. So we say sentience cannot be simulated. And further, it could be added that a sophisticated view of selfhood probably would define it or include in it what can be called self-activity, as opposed to construing sentience or selfhood as some kind of blank awareness of something other than it. Sophisticated kind of phenomenological approaches see that a person is self-active. So, for example, I can think and I can feel and I can determine myself to move. And then whether or not it happens depends, but I'm self-active, at least in some sense. And we see that there is a distinct relation between one's own self-activity and the motions of a body one calls one's own. The reason I say that my body is my own, or some big reasons, is that aside from feeling pain and pleasure concerning one body, generally, right? And conjoined twins, maybe there's some complexities, but generally speaking, there's a particular body that follows my instructions, that follows my will. It's this one, whatever that is. Again, some complexities with conjoined twins, probably, namely that. So if, for instance, a robotic arm was hooked up to me to where I could direct it, I would begin to say, oh, that's my arm, at least functionally speaking. A car that obeys my commands, oh, that's my car. Right? I'm the one that's driving it because it's obeying my commands. So we can see, I want to move, and then what moves? I may want to move that other person's hand really badly, but it's not going to move. Just for my desire. I may want, like in some movies, something over there to move because I said so, but it won't do so just for my desire. If I have strings attached, something like that, but just for my desire. And my hands, hopefully, unless I'm paralyzed or something like that, or unless I don't have them, do move in response to my desire. And just so I can blink in response to my desire and walk and talk if I can, and move around and all that. So here, in order to simulate that, we can grant, or let's grant that in principle, in far-fetched theory, it would be possible to simulate the anatomy as external, as it appears in a mirror, as it can be photographed, as it can be videoed. And yet those appearances would need to correlate one-to-one with one's volition. In other words, it would be something like goggles over one's eyes, and then the hands that I see there, as probably is already possible, they follow my desires. And yet, we see that in real life, if I don't have goggles over my eyes, then I don't have goggles over my eyes. And then the only way to possibly have the appearance of an anatomy conform to my self-activity would be to somehow directly stimulate a real living brain, it would be, in order to make it appear that there is an anatomy in its aspects of appearance, such as responds one-to-one to self-activity. So thus far, to have a quote-unquote simulation, it would have to be a real person, since there are no glasses over our eyes normally, right? It appears that we are in the real world. It would have to be a real person that is put out, in like some movie, and it becomes unconscious of their entire anatomy, and then retains their sentience, retains their self-activity, somehow that is elicited without connection with their real body, and then the appearance of an anatomy is directly inserted into that person's brain. Right? Now, that might be all that we need to say, because that is almost certainly impossible. Who said that it is possible to directly stimulate the cerebral organ so as to kind of insert, would it be, in an innumerable amount of appearances which perfectly conform to self-activity in somebody's mind? So, for instance, again, I want to move a hand. I'm unconscious of my real body. Somehow a computer inserts the image of a moving hand into my unconscious body. into my brain. So already there we could stop and say that's preposterous and there's no technology that could do that. But let's just say that speculatively speaking, purely speculatively speaking, somebody says, you know what, one day that'll be possible. You can lay there and you can feel stomach aches and you can blink your eyes and you can see yourself eating and you can feel every kind of sensation and heat and cold and so forth. And you can see everything at the behest of a computer, which stimulates your brain. And you are fully lucid and sentient, right? And yet insentient of your actual body. Let's just say somebody says that. There's additional complexities here, which would be that anybody that has grown from childhood to adulthood, assuming they have developed at least a little bit properly, the person has sustained a true change in their sentience, in their selfhood, in their self-active individuality. So that too then would somehow need to be quote unquote simulated. And there we really run into a dead end. What would it mean to simulate the complete change that occurs inwardly from childhood to adulthood? So it would have to be, again, a real human body that the simulation is occurring concerning which. So what would it be that a society takes a baby and then stimulates the baby's brain in order to cast the appearance of an anatomy which conforms one-to-one with self-activity, all the way from the baby's initial stage to adulthood? That is a mumbo jumbo. And an additional kind of soft objection, meaning not necessarily an absolutely logical one, but a soft objection would be that that would be extremely unethical. It would be the ultimate deception to so do. And yet we see that in this world, as it appears to be to common sense, there are innumerable signs of truth and beauty and goodness. And there are innumerable wonderful works from great minds, as far as we can tell, right, that speak of lofty ethical, moral, intellectual ideals. So it would then have to be that the same society that captures a given baby to stimulate their brain to make it appear that they are controlling a body that is not really their own, also had the wisdom to artificially generate all of that work that appears in this world, right? And yet did some such extremely, ultimately unethical thing, orchestrated a supreme falsehood. So that's not an absolute objection, because somebody could say, okay, maybe they did, right? Okay, but it's just an additional consideration. So anyhow, if we think superficially, simulation, why not? There's video games, there's virtual reality. Put on a pair of goggles and there we go. Then it may sound plausible to say, maybe we're in a simulation, right? There's going to be so many simulations. Isn't it statistically probable that I'm in a simulation? But if we think critically about the difference between subject and object, appearance and self-activity and sentience, then we see that it's not even that it's wrong, it's just a bunch of empty words incorrectly attached together. So hopefully we can see that and be reassured that any such statements as that I am in assimilation, at least in a essential absolute sense. Obviously I can put on a pair of VR goggles or watch a movie or a video and in that sense be in assimilation, but in any profound absolute sense, hopefully we can be reassured that any such statements are nonsense. Thank you for listening.